All right, I'm gonna get us started here. It is 6:02. So thank you for being here on time. If you did show up, hopefully more people show up as we go along. But if not, it's gonna be completely fine because it'll be more interactive that way. Just to make sure you guys can hear me, right? Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm gonna drop in the chat right now a case book. If you guys are ever wondering like where the hell does Eli get these cases? Like, does he just come up with this? How does he get the answers? Usually I source it from a case book. And what's happening there is it's just a bunch of different cases, usually from different firms. So it's usually a variety of first round, second round, and final round interviews. So I'm gonna drop in the chat Queens' case book right now. Queens is a college out in Toronto. They're considered a target school out in Canada. However, we're not in Canada, but they have a really good case book. It really walks through what a case is, different types of frameworks, different types of cases. And I would just give it a read if I were you, especially if you're truly considering consulting as a career. These are good practice cases to start using some of the frameworks that you guys are learning, um, uh, to use some of the frameworks that you guys are learning with actual practice cases. So wanted to drop that in the chat and also drop that at the end. Will these links be sent out? Yes, I will attach the Queen's casebook in the email also. Um, and then I will also drop the recording in there. So hopefully that answers that. But let me share my screen here. I think I'm gonna have to share this one. I guess we'll see in a couple seconds. Okay. From beginning. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Should be the presentation, not my notes, right? Perfect. Awesome. So today we're going to be focusing on estimations or market sizing. So if you guys weren't here last week, this is basically what a case interview is. I'm going to talk about what a case interview is. Market sizing is one of or one type of case interview that you could implement, or it could also be part of a case interview. So what is a case interview? It's a simplified, condensed version of a full consulting project where a candidate is expected to explore the data and provide solutions to a client's issues. I'm going to kind of run through this just because we did this last week. So if you missed this last week, this is kind of just a review. And I also want to get into the case here. Um, from Bain's website. So what are they looking for? They want to see the approach you're taking to solve a problem, how analytical and creative you are in terms of your thinking, your usage of data to quantify your recommendations. And today we're going to be using a lot more data, especially because we're going to be market sizing. So we're going to be creating assumptions ourselves and backing up those assumptions from there to create a market size for whatever you're thinking, honestly. Your communication skills and conveying your ideas, and then how you would suggest implementing those proposals. So common themes. So we talked about this last week. Profitability, market entry is what we're going to be focusing on this week. But next week, we're going to be focusing on profitability. Growth or how to enter a new market is usually another one. Acquisition, M&A, is another one that you could think about, or another type of case that you might be given. But the whole idea here is I'm showing these to you guys so that you guys are aware of what type of cases that we are doing, so that if you ever get into the interview and you are, facing one of these types of cases, you kind of think back to, okay, what type of case is this? And maybe what type of framework did we use to approach that case? And how can I maybe adjust that framework to, make a better recommendation for this specific case? So this is kind of the format, and we're gonna kind of go through this a little bit more. But at the beginning, what you usually do is you're given the case, and this is for the case interview component. But usually a case interview is 1 hour long, but the actual case is about 30 to 45 minutes. But at first, you're given the prompt, and then from there, you're going to be asking some clarifying questions. So we're going to do this in practice a little bit later. But after you get the full scope of the case, then what you do is you usually take about 2 minutes, 90 seconds to build out a framework. A framework is just a way of approaching a problem. And there's different types of frameworks. Last week we talked about the profitability and the 3 C's. We're going to explore those more as we go on through the program. But that's more or less what happens there. After that, you're usually given some type of exhibit. Today, that's not really what's going to happen. A lot of it's going to be driven off our assumptions. And then after that, you go into some type of brainstorming session where they ask you more or less questions about your framework and more or less questions about how you're actually going to implement the idea that you're talking about. At the end, there's usually a roundabout where you talk about the whole case, what you did, And then from there, try to conclude with a recommendation and also try to lay out the next steps or some risks that might come along with this project. Perfect. And let me make this bigger over here. Make sure there's no questions. Huge. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on it? I know that was fast, but we're still going to be going through. Hopefully, you were here last week, and if you weren't, um, that's completely fine because we're going to be doing pretty much the similar steps today. So, any questions there? Perfect. Awesome. So, estimation cases, market sizing is another way of thinking about it. Why are we doing it? So, it's not that most people can't size a market or at least estimate, what the certain size of a market is. But most people struggle with estimation cases, not because they can't do them, but because when they do them, it's often unstructured. And if you go back to what I said last week, what we're trying to think here is structure. We want to be structured as a consultant anyway. Anytime we say something, anytime we're thinking out loud, we want it to be in a structured format. That's the whole reason of a framework. So usually they fail to discuss each assumption and often forget to mention at least one important issue. So that's something that we'll come to at the end. But what is the goal of an estimation case? The goal of it is to demonstrate to the interview that you could think like a consultant by being structured. Many day-to-day challenges can be solved by using the skills that you learned today. For example, as a consultant, you might want to verify the numbers in your financial model. Auditing the entire model would probably take a couple days, maybe even 2 or 3 days, right? So instead, what you would do is quickly come up with what the number should be to see if that's going to actually make sense, right? You're going to use that fundamental skill set or at least framework to, be able to, you know, at least save you some time or quickly estimate what a number should be, and if it makes sense. Additionally, when speaking with someone from a specific industry who has deep expertise, you should, as a consultant, always step back and try to build out a tree structure of the market size and the generic profit structure. So when I say that, I mean how the company makes money. Um, this helps identify the growth and the profit drivers of not only the industry, but that specific company, and allows for a deeper conversation on various topics. In conclusion, estimation cases are not just about making quick estimates. The idea here is to build you a skill set that you could utilize not only in a role in consulting, but in any day-to-day task that you might be doing, even in school and stuff like that. Okay, awesome. So how are we going to actually approach this? It's similar to what I showed a couple slides ago, which is the format, right? We're gonna give them the prompt, and then we're gonna be asking some clarifying questions. So here, same thing. After we're given the prompt, we're gonna want to clarify the scope. From there, we apply our framework, or here what I'm gonna call it is structure the problem. In market sizing, after we structure our problem, the difference here is we're actually gonna assign numbers to, our framework, and we're gonna have to choose these assumptions. You are gonna have to actually out loud clarify these assumptions. More or less lay out why you think you're putting a certain number to a certain part of the framework. And you'll kind of see how this works out in a couple seconds. But after you choose your assumptions, what you want to do is you want to actually give the interviewer your framework, or actually after you structure your problem and before you choose your assumptions, what you want to do is give your interviewer a more or less like a check. Am I using the right framework? Am I going about this the right way? Once they give you that check, then from there you could choose your assumptions and then start calculating those assumptions. After that, what we want to do is we want to check our answer. So we want to use not only, I guess, the calculations that we have on our framework, or at least on our paper, but we also want to bring that to life with a real life example. And you guys will kind of see how that works in a couple seconds. So what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to walk through the 5 steps live through myself. And then from there, we'll do a live case at the end, right? So you guys can actually see how these steps are being utilized. And then from there, you guys can actually utilize the steps later. The framework that I'll be using will be a little bit different than what we'll be using in the case later on. Or it might be something similar. I mean, you guys can come up with, the market size any way you want, but at least what I'll be showing is a guide. So, This is our case question, and I'll be solving this, so no need to come off me. But if there's anybody that has questions, make sure to stop me. Your client is a private equity fund faced with the decision of investing in a rapidly growing candy company called Jupiter. Jupiter's primary growth strategy for the next year revolves around the quality of its bubblegum. Your team has been assigned to help the client determine whether to invest in Jupiter. After the initial problem-solving meeting, you were tasked with quickly estimating the size of the bubblegum market in the US. How would you approach this? Right? So another thing that I want to say before I even hop into the case is market sizings could be like your first round interview. So last week we actually did like a whole case where we kind of did an analysis, and then from there well, at first we asked our clarifying questions, we pitched our framework, and then from there we did our analysis with the data given to us. Right? That was more of a full case, and that's usually what you could expect. However, a lot of first rounds turn out to be market sizing cases, and a lot of final rounds with partners who really just want to see how you think. They sometimes even deploy market sizing cases. What you could expect overall is that in every case, or in most cases, they're going to ask you to size the market, right? And most of the time you can think about this. If you're ever going into a growth case, like say I want to grow my company or find ways to grow my company, or say I want to enter a new market, usually what you want to do is analyze the market itself. And one of the questions you're going to ask is, how big is that market? And when you ask that question, the interviewer might be like, we don't have data for that. We don't have data for that. But can you quickly estimate the size of the market? And this could be a whole component of your interview, and this might take about 10 to 15 minutes, but that's 10 to 15 minutes out of a 45, 30-minute interview. So this is a big chunk of your case interview, and this is something that I really want to focus on, and that you guys are aware about. So here, what is our case question? So our case question is, what is the size of the bubble gum market? So we were given the case question. Now what should we do, right? Well, we need to ask our clarifying questions. So right here, what are some questions that I could ask? So as I'm thinking here, right, we want to size the bubblegum market. And as I'm thinking of bubblegum, I'm thinking, do we want to size the market in units sold, or do we want to size the market in dollar amount, right? So when I say that, is like, in how many dollars is how big is this market? So is it $15 billion? Is that the size of this market? Or is it how many pieces of gum are actually being sold? In this case, since I'm the interviewer and I want to make it easier on myself, I'm going to say that it's in dollars per year, right? That I want to figure out the market in dollars per year. So that's my first clarifying question. My second clarifying question is bubble gum. So as I'm thinking of bubble gum, do I want to estimate the size of just like chewing gum? Am I also thinking of like nicotine gum? Like there's other types of gum that could be utilized for different reasons. What am I specifically thinking about in this case? And since I'm the interviewer here, we're just going to say that Jupiter's main objective here is to figure out the bubble gum market. So think Hubba Bubba or one of those type of brands. And we're trying to figure out how big that market size is. Okay, perfect. So now I've clarified the scope. I've asked my clarifying questions. Now I get about 2 minutes to actually approach my framework. And you guys are going to get this a little bit later. But since I've already done this before, or since I made this presentation, it's going to be a little bit easier here. So when I'm thinking of the bubblegum market in the US in dollars per year, a framework that I could utilize is, I know that the bubblegum market in the US is going to be the number of pieces sold, so how many bubblegums were sold, times the price of those pieces, right? So number of pieces sold times price per piece is going to give me the total bubblegum market, right? So here I could, probably stop my framework, but I'm not going to stop here because this is not really thought out. This is just like a baseline, right? This is almost like your revenue equation. Your sales times how many units you sell is going to tell you how much your sales is. That's going to be the same thing here for a market. The number of pieces you sold times the price per piece is going to give you the total market size, right? However, for the number of pieces sold, I think we can go in a little bit deeper, and that's what we're going to do here. So what we're going to do here is to figure out the number of pieces sold. We're going to look at the number of consumers times the average yearly consumption per consumer. And when I say this average yearly consumption per consumer, what I'm saying here is how much gum do people chew per year, right? And I'll add some assumptions later to that, but I just want to clarify that point. How many pieces of gum are people chewing per year? Average yearly consumption per consumer. I could put this on a weekly basis. I could put this on a yearly basis. I could put this on a daily basis. But make sure at the end you times it by 365, 50, or divided by one if you're in this case, right? For the number of consumers, I know that I could go a little bit deeper with that. And this is just a framework. So if you guys don't really, know this right now, this is something that you guys could write down and you guys are probably going to be utilizing a little bit later too, or at least adapting later. But if I wanted to figure out the number of consumers, what I could do is look at the total population, US population, because I want to size the market in the US. And that could have been another clarifying question, but in this question here, it's the US market. Um, and then the penetration rate of bubblegum. When I say penetration rate of bubblegum is how many people are going to buy bubblegum. So how many people that out of 10 people do you know are going to buy bubblegum, right? That's what I mean when I say penetration rate. So if we run back down this, if I start off with bubblegum market in the US, well, I could step back and think about that being the number of pieces sold times the price per piece. And then to figure out more about the number of pieces sold, what I could do is I could look at the number of consumers and times that by the average yearly consumption per consumer. However, I think that the number of consumers is unclear. And to get to that number, what I could do is I could start off with the total population and then figure out how many people actually would buy gum overall or chew gum overall with the penetration rate. So in the later case, you guys are going to be using a replacement rate instead of maybe a penetration rate. But this is just the basic structure that I have here. And now what I would do is I would turn this around, give it to my interviewer and be like, is this okay? Does this look good? Is this a good way to approach it? If he says yes, is a good way to approach it. Now what I would do is now I got to choose my assumptions. So what we're going to do here, and if you look at this, I don't know, can you guys see my mouse here? If you look at this, total population times penetration rate leads into the number of consumers. So when I'm choosing an assumption, I know that I only need an assumption for these two, right? 1, 2 is going to be some type of calculation that's going to lead here. And then I'm also going to need an assumption here, right? Because this number times this number is going to equal something here. And then one other assumption for price per piece. So as I'm looking at my framework, I see that things kind of lead into each other. That's why we're building out this tree structure. Utilize that tree structure because in this case, you're going to kind of see it here. I'm going to start off with total population. So I know that the US population is 350 million. One thing that I would say is try to use easier numbers, especially when you're choosing assumptions, because inevitably you're going to have to calculate this. So what you're going to see here is me choose some easier numbers, but I'm also going to show you ways to think about math here too. So for the penetration rate, so total population, that's an assumption. That's not really that's kind of a given. People know the US population. It's either somewhere between 320 million to 350 million. But for the penetration rate of gum, how many people do I think out of 10 actually buy gum? Right. And as I'm thinking of young kids and I'm thinking of old people, I know that some of them might not buy gum, but I think that most people have either bought gum in their life or chew gum constantly, right? So with the penetration rate there, I'll say probably about 8 out of 10 people chew gum or have chewed gum in their life. So for there, what I'm going to do is 80%, right? So now if I do 350 million times 80%, that's going to lead to the number of consumers. So that's kind of what I was talking about a couple seconds ago. But what I want to do is choose my assumptions first. I don't want to calculate right away. I want to choose my assumptions first. So now I know that my next assumption that I have to choose is the average yearly consumption per consumer. So average yearly consumption per consumer. How much gum do people chew per year, right? On my case, I chew gum a lot. I could get through a pack in like a day or two. Like I'm not even lying. However, I know most people are not like that, right? But I could probably assume that most people chew about 1 to 2 pieces every day, right? So if I'm thinking about that, let's just say 8 pieces per week. 8 pieces per week times 50 weeks equals 400. So now what I have is an average yearly consumption per consumer. 400 pieces of gum per year. I think about people will chew about 400 pieces of gum per year. So let me add that, right? Now I've kind of filled out that side of the framework. One other side of the framework that I have to do is that price per piece side. So what I'm going to do there is I'm just going to assign 10 cents because that's an easy number for me. Another assumption that you could say is we're thinking of price per piece. So don't think of a bubble gum pack. Think of like a Hubba Bubba that you could buy, or maybe like a circle gum that you could buy. I'm going to assign 10 cents per piece. I know some gums are more expensive. I know some gums are really dirt cheap. Like juicy fruit is pretty cheap. But I know like extra can get a little bit more expensive. But if I'm even thinking Hubba Bubba, you buy a pack of 20, it's probably about, $2. So that's about 10 cents per piece, right? So I'll just say 10 cents per piece. You could change it to whatever. This is not the right numbers. These are just assumptions, right? Now I have my assumptions. Now what I could do is actually calculate the numbers, right? So from there, I've already assigned my assumptions. What I'm going to start off with, I'm going to start all the way to the right side with total population and the penetration rate first, because that just makes sense. I can't really figure out the number of pieces sold without figuring out the total population first, at least in this framework. So to figure out 350 million times 80, I'm going to try to give you guys some tricks here, and I'm going to try to do my best. But what you could do here is you could break up 350 million into 300 million and 50 million, right? And then take 80% of both of those numbers. Well, how can you take 80% of 300 million, right? Well, what you could do is 8 times 3, right? Especially if it's 300. 300 has 2 zeros after it, so I could just erase those zeros. 8 times 3 equals 24, right? 24. So 240 million is 80% of 300 million. So now I know that 24, right? So I have that 24 number in my head. But then I also have that 50 million number, right? And I know 8 times 5 is 40, or you could think 4 million in this case, right? So now what I'm thinking is I have the 240 million, or the 200, yeah, the 240 million from the 80% of the 300 million. And then I have the 40 million from the 80% of 50 million. Add those two numbers together, that's 280. That's how I do my math in consulting. There's probably tons of different videos, but that's how I do quick math calculations when it comes to maybe having some larger numbers, right? So now I have the number of consumers, right? So now what I could do is the number of consumers times the yearly consumption rate per consumers. So we've already done that assumption. So 400 times 280 million, right? So think about this, right? Kind of do the same math that I just did right now. So if I break this number into 200 million and 80 million, what I could do is 200 times 4 is going to be 200 times 4 is 800 million, right? So 2 times 4, and then I have 80 million times 4, that's 32 million, or 320 billion. So if you add 800 million plus 320 billion, that gets you to a market size of 112, or 112 million, or billion in this case. So it would realistically be 1.12 million billion. Sorry. So it's the 800 million plus the 320 million. That gives you 1.12 billion. 112 billion, actually. My first number was right. So see, this could be like, this is why you kind of have to work on your math here when it comes to, I guess, frameworks. But I guess I'm like 4 months out from recruiting season, so I could chill on myself right now. But as you can see, the math gets hard, and there's different ways to do it, but make sure that you're clean and quick with your math. I actually make a point about this later, but I just fucked up. So, and I have the calculations here, bro. I'm literally struggling, but I have them on the side. But whatever. At the end, if I take 10% of 112 billion, that's really quick. So 11.2 billion. So that gives me the total bubblegum market size in the United States. I probably should have, practiced the math here a little bit, but that's how we calculated it. At the end, what we want to do is that we actually want to check our answer. So this is the fourth step after we've chosen our assumptions. Now we calculated. Now what we want to do is actually check this answer, or reality check this answer. So is $11.2 billion actually reasonable for the bubblegum market, right? So it's kind of hard to kind of check this answer, but you could kind of use different figures, right? So if you think about it, each American spends about $30 per year, or 30, according to this $11.2 billion dollars. This is saying that each American spends about $30 per year on bubblegum. That's between 1 and 3 fast food meals, right? And I could say myself, I chew a lot of gum. I probably spend, an equivalent to about 5, 6, 7 meals per year um, on bubble gum. But that makes it sound reasonable, right? So I'm more of a consumer, right? And I spend about 7 meals on bubble gum, but the average consumer spends about 1 to 3 meals on actual bubble gum. So this is kind of just a way to check, uh, I guess, check the figures. Uh, I guess later in the case you'll see a better way to do it, but if there's anything way off, at least in this case, one thing that you also want to do is you also want to check more or less if I guess what could really throw off your case. So if you're looking here, what could really throw off our case here? Well, it's probably going to be the price per piece. So if we change that, that would drastically change our bubblegum market size. And then if we change our average yearly consumption per consumer, that would probably drastically change the market size of the United States. So as we think back to checking our answer, we also want to make sure that we are aware of where our answer could be off and make that clear to the interviewer also. Um, so yeah, awesome. So I'm just gonna walk through what I did, and then from there we'll go into the live case, and then I'll ask you guys what you guys think. But these are the 5 steps. First, you want to clarify the scope. After that, you want to structure your problem. From there, you want to choose your assumptions, calculate, and do better than I did. And then from there, check your answers. So first, for clarifying the scope, we kind of talked about this last week, but ask anything related to the question or the case at hand that you may have. Be aware of gray areas in your uh, in your scope. Specifically in the last case that we just did, um, I asked if nicotine gum was important, right? So that was a gray area in our scope because we were asking for the bubble gum market size, but there's different types of gum or chewing gum out there. So you also want to be aware of that. In other cases, another thing that you want to be aware of is usually if it's B2B or B2C. So when I say B2B is our client selling business to business? So is that the way they make money? Do they sell to other businesses and then the businesses pay them? Is that how they make money? Or do they sell directly to consumers? So this will come up maybe later in the other case, but I also wanted to mention that. In terms of asking any scope related questions, you want to make sure that you know what you're actually estimating. So you want to know the potential market. So here I knew that it was in the dollar value instead of the unit sold. And then that also, I guess, leads into the right metrics. So you want to make sure that you're utilizing or at least answering the right metrics that the interviewer is asking for. So that's that. That's clarifying the scope. That's just asking questions. From there, you want to go into actually structuring the problem. You want to make it as easy as possible for your interviewer to follow you by taking time before your assumptions to walk the interviewer through the framework to make sure that it's clear. So have your interviewer actually understand the full logic of what you're doing. So I stopped actually in the live case, and said that I would turn this around to the interviewer at this point and ask him if this framework even makes sense. From there, usually what happens is they give you some type of feedback. The whole point of idea or of a case interview is that they're trying to help you out. They're not there just to make your time hard or just to make you struggle. They're trying to help you out. And in a case interview, you're supposed to work with the interviewer almost as a teammate or as you would in a consulting project to get to the answer. So don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be too afraid to, make sure that they understand what the hell you're talking about. Use top-down structures. So you're going to hear this. What is a top-down structure? So a top-down structure, it starts with the big picture. So as you can see here is with our top-down structure, we started with the bubble gum market in the United States. There's other ways that you might learn market sizing that you start with total population. However, what we did is we started with the bubble gum market, then we broke it down into 2 components. we broke down one of those two components into, two other components. And then we did the same thing here to get to the total population. The idea here is more or less, um, I guess for me, it's more clear to show your ideas. It makes it a lot harder when you're following I think it's called a bottom down approach. At least to be followed or sometimes to even, I guess, like understand or envision what they're saying. Just think about it. If you started with the total population, at least in this case, right? If you started with the total population and then from there you were like, okay, I want to know about the penetration rate of bubblegum, that's going to get me to the number of consumers. And then from there, the number of consumers is going to get multiplied by the average consumption per consumer. That's going to give me the number of pieces sold. And then if I know the price per piece, then I could get to the bubblegum market. That's the way of doing a bottoms down approach. I feel like what we did is a lot more structured, a lot more clear, and allows the interviewer to at least follow what you're thinking and make any adjustments if necessary. So, and then explicitly state the algebra in your structure. So here it was a little bit easier because we were just doing basic multiplication. But if you're going to be doing division, make sure you tell the interviewer, I'm going to divide this by this. Usually that happens in a units sold case. So, okay, perfect. From there, you're choosing your assumptions. So what you want to do here is you want to use data and logic to actually back up your assumptions. So if you saw what I was doing here, actually, I don't have my assumptions laid out here, but there you go. I knew that the total population was 350 million, but when I was talking about the penetration rate, I was talking about personal experience. So I know, or I was actually talking, yeah, I was talking about personal experience. So I know that most people around me chew a lot of gum, but I could also be subjective to, babies don't chew gum and, people with like dentures don't chew gum. But I know most people have either chewed gum or, buy gum consistently. So I said 8 out of 10 people. That was my subjective choice, but I used some type of data and logic to back it up. Same thing with average yearly consumption. I chew about, a pack per 2 days, but I know people probably chew 1 to 2 pieces per day. And then I turn that into 8. And I times that by 50 to get 400. So that's just another way. Focus on what matters. So like I said there, the things that would have really, thrown off our assumptions here would probably have been the price per piece or the yearly consumption per consumer. So that's probably where you want to actually maybe do more of a deep dive or, explain yourself a little bit more in comparison to total population. That's kind of just a given assumption. Or even the penetration rate. If the penetration rate was 50%, it might throw off the case a little bit. However, it doesn't really matter. Most people chew. You could assume that over 50% of the population does chew gum. 60%, 70%. It doesn't really matter what you choose in that range. What really matters is the average yearly consumption per consumer and the price per piece in terms of that total market size. And then it's okay to ask any questions. Try to get creative also when it comes to choosing your assumptions or even thinking out loud with them. Awesome. From there, we go into the calculations where I fucked up so bad, but that's completely fine because this is just practice. So the whole idea here is to find ways to make these calculations easier. Expect calculations, expect to be doing math live, expect it today. The idea is they must be precise and efficient. When I say precise, what I mean is if you make a mistake, fix it, right? Don't try to hide it. Don't try to just keep going. If you see a mistake and you've made a mistake, fix it. I'd rather you make the mistake and actually come up and be clear about it than you just try to, slide past it. And at the end, we have, some huge mistake that could have been fixed 15 minutes ago, right? After we've applied all of our calculations and stuff like that. So try to, fix any mistakes that you want to have. But at the same time, try to be efficient. So try to be quick at the math. I try to show you a way of doing math that might be a little bit quick, but sometimes you might get lost with the zeros there. And that's what happened to me. So just be aware of that. Sometimes if you have to write it out, that's completely fine. But in consulting, you can't bring a calculator to a case. That's not how it works. You got to use your brain and you got to be quick with it. So try to learn those, quick math tricks. Awesome. And then from there, checking your answer. So compare your value to something to get an idea of whether it makes sense or not. That's the whole idea here. Be okay with using a creative figure to compare it. So I used meals, and I got that case off somewhere, so it was a little bit of a weird A little bit of a weird check answer, I would say. But you could get creative with it. And I guess it worked in that scenario. So um, I would also say, try to think about ways that you could actually make sense of the market size number that you gave. Um, and if you can't find a way, say what you would like to do. So you want to be a consultant who checks their numbers to see if they make sense. So if you can't find a way, or if you can't really get creative with numbers, um, say what you would like to do, or say maybe if you would try to compare it to some type of data metrics that you would try to use. So maybe be like, okay, I don't have maybe GDP right now of this certain country, but I would like to compare it to GDP, and take a certain percentage of GDP to see if this actually makes sense, right? Um, just try to find a way, and if you can't, at least state what you would like to do. Okay, any questions there? I fucked up with the math, but any questions there in terms of market sizing, in terms of why we should market size, in terms of maybe explanation of that math trick that I did, anything that you guys might have. Should we avoid giving a min and max price? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I would find like a relative range. So I know I was talking about in the bubblegum market that, there's expensive pieces of gum, but I know there's dirt cheap pieces of gum. I would try to find some type of middle ground. However, there's other cases where you could actually break down like price per piece into like three different buckets, turn it into some weighted average, and then you could really figure out what the price per piece should actually be. So if like 60% of the market is old people, and old people don't buy that much gum, and then the other 40% is teens, or the other 30% is teens. Well, teens probably chew a little bit more gum, so you could probably do some type of quick math calculation. Um, Actually, that's for pricing per piece. Um, Actually, no, that wouldn't even make sense in the bubblegum situation. What you would do for price per piece, in the bubblegum situation, is maybe grab like the high tier brand, low tier brand, and a medium tier brand, and then maybe assign some type of market weight or market share that they might have in the market, and then just times it by like 30, times it by 40, and then times it by 30. And then from there, you can figure out what a relative price should actually be. But what I would try to do, just for simplicity and for the case today, is just pick a price. Pick a price. Pick a pepper. Okay, I'm gonna go now. So this case question is gonna be a little bit easier, but today's case question is, what is the mattress market size in Brazil? Awesome. So we're gonna kind of do what we did last week. From there, we're gonna ask some clarifying questions. So I'm gonna actually get my notebook out just so I can do this with you guys. And then what I post, I guess, is more or less recommended, but I want to see you guys try this live case. So let me just get some paper ready. Yeah, I guess this works. Okay. So the first step in the 5-step approach to market sizing is clarifying the scope. And I guess in any question is getting those clarifying questions out the way. So I just asked you, what is the market size of Brazil, of mattresses in Brazil? Does anybody want to come off mute and ask any clarifying questions? If not, I'll just call on somebody random.
What is the approximate population of Brazil?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So in this case, what we're going to use is 200 million as a baseline for Brazil. But I think that's a really good question, especially because we don't know, right? So if you're afraid or you don't know what the market size might be, ask it, right? 211 million. Yeah, somebody actually figured it out. So it's 211 million to be exact. But here in this case, what we'll use is 200 million just for simplicity and just for math's sake. Um, and kind of like how I use that 350 million. I don't know what the United States is at. It's probably like 320 or something like that. But 350 is a little bit easier for me to work with. Okay.
Similar to what you were asking before, is this going to be in number of mattresses or in US dollars? And I'm not sure what the
Yeah.
currency is in Brazil, but
Yeah, that's a good question. It's going to be in dollars, at least for this case, just because we're in the U.S. market, and we want to figure out how big it is in U.S. dollars. But that's a good question. It's not going to be in units sold. We want to figure out how big it is in terms of dollars. Any other questions that somebody might have?
Does the size of the mattress depend? Meaning, like, could it be like smaller size mattresses, maybe for like baby crates or something like that? Because I feel like
Yeah,
that would count.
I think that's a great question. That might play into our pricing. But you could also build out a framework there. I think what I'm going to do or what I'm going to recommend is just one price. My did my speaker just die? What up?
you're a little choppy.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah,
Now you can hear me?
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. My AirPod just died. So, um, uh, I think that's going to affect more of the pricing model. So, twin beds, full size beds, king size beds. That's a great question. And that could affect our pricing model. And maybe what you could do is build out, different pricings for maybe twin size bed, full size bed, and king size bed to get an actual price per bed. But what I'm going to do in this case, just for simplicity, is assign a price. But that could be one of the assumptions that you throw in. Um, but yeah, I think these are really good questions. I think one other one, these are the ones that I had an example of. So how many mattresses sold this year in dollars per year? So that was a good question. In this case, what we're going to do is dollars per year. Another one that I had that I thought was a pretty good question was, are we trying to estimate only consumers or organizations that purchase mattresses? So if you think like hotels, if you think like hospitals, they buy mattresses, they're in the mattress market. Um, should we be considering them in terms of the total population or people that are buying beds? In this case, no. In this case, we're just going to think like consumer mattresses. We're going to think like, what's that? Mattress Firm. You go to Mattress Firm and you go buy a mattress. That's what we're trying to get at here. So how many mattresses are bought in the Brazil market?
I have another question too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would this include like resale of mattresses or like anything like that? Or is this just your
It's on a per year basis. So what you might have to do on your framework, and that's a really good question, is maybe implement some type of growth rate or replacement rate for these mattresses. So if you think about it, not many people are buying that many mattresses per year, right? So how many times maybe are you going to actually be replacing this mattress? And to figure out the actual market size for the year, you might have to implement some type of replacement rate. So if I'm thinking about it, I think maybe I'll replace my mattress just to sound clean in this Zoom call. I'll say one every 4 years, but realistically, it's probably like one in every 10 years I'll replace my mattress, if even that. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Riley. But now that I guess that leads into our framework portion. So structure the problem. What I want you to do, I'm going to give you guys about 2 minutes. I'll put a timer here. I'll do it with you guys. Um, and then from there, we get going. So let me put on a timer here. I don't have my watch on today, so sucks. All right, go ahead. 2 minutes, structure out. Let's do it. Actually, and I'll give you guys more or less a starting point if you're lost, but it was kind of similar to the same framework that we used in the last case. So number of beds times price per bed. So if you wanted to start off somewhere.
All right, that's 2 minutes, 15 seconds. I just built out my framework. And as I promised, more or less at the beginning, that I'll do frameworks with you guys. So that's my framework here before I had any assumptions, but built it out. Would love to hear how you guys thought about this before I even introduce anything. So I'm going to call on somebody random here. I'm going to call on, let's see. Let's call on SK. Let's get him again this week. Looks like SK's in the shower again.
Can you hear me?
So
Can you hear
there
me?
he is. Yo, what up?
So, to structure this problem, to find a market size of mattresses in Brazil,
Yep.
what I basically brainstormed on was, again, kind of a rough idea, but what I did was find the number of, estimate at the number of beds needed per house and multiply that with the total number of houses. And for like more details, we can also count number of beds needed in per hotels and the number of hotels in Brazil. And for a rough estimation, we can also assume the hospitals because even they need mattresses.
Okay. I I would say I appreciate the structure. I would say maybe there were some flaws in there, and maybe it was just a way of thinking about it or going less about it. But I like kind of where you started at. I kind of got lost a little bit on the end side, but that's something that's completely fine. Maybe that's something that you could just turn around and show your interviewer. But no, I appreciate you coming off mute and trying that out, SK. All right. Let's see if my headphones will hear that one as good. All right. Can you guys hear me? Perfect. Okay. Um, Anybody else want to come off mute? Then I'm gonna get Devassus. I want to hear what you're thinking, bro.
Before you did mention like the question of like, was the are we looking at mattresses only from the consumer standpoint or from the organization?
Yeah.
And this framework's like based off like, let's just say like a family, like a consumer, right?
Okay.
So I was thinking market size is going to be split between the number of beds times the price per bed. That's going to give us like the total revenue of it. And from the number of beds, I was thinking multiplying the number of consumers with the number of households. Because I was thinking of based off like what I know, not like everybody in Brazil has access to like good housing. So that has like a factor to play into it. So number of consumers, I was thinking like total population times the purchase slash repurchase rate because not everybody is buying a mattress every year. And
Yeah.
that's where I stopped.
No, I think that's pretty good. So if I got that right, you're gonna get the number of beds and the price per bed. And then to figure out the number of beds, what you're gonna do is you're going to look at the number of consumers and then figure out how many beds per actual household, right?
Yeah.
And then to get to the number of beds, or to the number of consumers, what you would do is you would look at the total population of Brazil, and then you would apply some type of growth rate or replacement rate to see if how many people are actually buying a bed per year.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty solid framework and pretty close to where we'll be at in a couple seconds. So I'm gonna give one more person a shot here. I'm gonna give Myla a shot here. She wants to come off mute. I got 400.
Hey, Elijah,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Let's hear
Sorry,
you.
I was looking for my buttons.
No, you're good.
Yeah. Okay, so this one is a tricky one. I think, well, I don't have a specific framework. I would definitely consider replacement rate.
Okay.
I would consider maybe like household size as well, right? How many
Yep.
people do we have an average per household? And I would hope the interviewer would stick with that as opposed to other areas, right? Like people mention hospitals, hotels, but if not, we would have to consider that as well. I just don't know how to get numbers.
No, that's
If
fair.
that makes
That's a
sense.
fair point, and that's kind of what we're here for. So,
For-
I think I think you bringing up the replacement rate is a really good point,
Yeah.
and the household size. So I think that what we're going to be doing a little bit later is calculating almost how many beds per household, and I
Yeah.
think that's going to kind of play into it, right? So like if you think about it, when you're younger, maybe you sleep up on a bunk bed, right? Or maybe you guys share a bed, right? Or if you're married, you probably sleep together, and if you don't, probably probably a bad sign, right? But you
Well, that
know,
was actually my question for like clarifying questions. I would have asked, what are the cultural considerations that we need to keep in
right.
mind? Because in Japan, for example, they use like the futons, right? A lot.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, so they have like it's called, well, it's the Japanese futon, it's the foldable mattress, right?
Got it.
So do people in Brazil also sleep on the floor, or are they using
Yeah.
actual mattresses? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's a
So
good clarifying question. I
yeah.
think in this case, what we're gonna assume is just mattresses that, me and you probably sleep on. But no, I think that's a really good question, and now you're bringing
Yeah.
up good points. Like you're getting creative, so I like that.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, let me show you what I did. Let me show you what my framework was. So this goes what after each click, no? There you go. Okay. So what we started off was with the number of beds sold times the price per bed, right? So that's almost like a revenue calculation, pretty easy. But what we want to do is go deeper into the number of beds actually sold. To get to the number of beds actually sold, we're kind of going to go with what Devasa said, but a little bit of a twist to it. So instead of figuring out the number of consumers, we're going to figure out the number of beds in use. And then we're going to times that by the replacement rate, right? So to figure out the number of beds in use in Brazil, well, we need the number of people who actually use a bed because Devas has brought up a really good point. Some people are homeless, some people don't have beds. So we also have to calculate that and be aware of that. And then we also have to times that by the number of beds per person. That will give us the number of beds per use. And then if we can multiply that by a replacement rate, that will give us the number of beds actually sold. But to get to the number of people who actually use those beds, we can start off with the population of Brazil. Like we start off usually anything. So usually when you're trying to build out a framework, you usually want to start off with, I guess at the end, you want to start off with the market size, right? And use your top-down structure. But the first assumption that you should be putting in is going to be the population. And the population, so like we said, there's people that are homeless, people that are not going to be able to buy beds. So to actually figure out that number, what we're going to do is population times the penetration rate. That penetration rate is probably going to be high because most people probably have some type of mattress, or most of the population has some type of mattress. But we're going to just consider that here, right? So now that we've structured our problems, what we could actually do is add some assumptions to this. And I don't really know how to test this, but I kind of want to see, I'm going to ask you a couple of them, and I want to just see how you would think about it and maybe how you would assign numbers to it. So I'm going to ask here for beds per person to see how you would think about that. Maybe penetration rate. I think that's a good one. Penetration rate. And then I also want to see the replacement rate. And then I'm going to ask Ava the price per bed because she brought up a good point. So we're going to see from her what she got with the price per bed. And this is a limited framework. Like what you could do is maybe build out the price per bed side. So Ava brought up a really good point there where, there's full size beds, king size beds, like what type of bed are we actually selling? And there's different pricing for them. Or mattresses are we actually selling? There's different prices for them. We have to be kind of aware for that. So we could kind of build out maybe a three-pronged structure there to figure out the price per bed too, or at least an average price per bed. But let me get that replacement rate down. So I had replacement rate and price per bed. Okay. Awesome. So
Now we're gonna choose those assumptions. On of, okay. Perfect. So we know that the total population of Brazil is 200 million. That was given because Matthew asked that. So thank you, Matthew. But I want to hear the penetration rate. So I want to hear maybe Liz. I want to hear what you think for penetration rate in terms of how many people are actually buying Brazilian bread, how many people are actually buying mattresses in Brazil, and maybe how you would assign a number to that. So Devas has brought up a good point that some people might be homeless, some people might not have beds, some people might, be sharing beds, but we'll probably calculate that a little bit later. But what do you think a appropriate penetration rate might be, and maybe give us some details behind that?
I'd say 6 people out of 10
Okay.
have
Okay. And
beds in
why
Brazil.
would you say that?
I'd say considering the fact that it's a lot more modern than people think.
Okay.
Then there are hotels in Brazil. There's a lot of hotels in Brazil, a lot of Airbnb. Then considering newborns, yeah, pretty
Okay.
much.
And I guess I would ask, maybe just to push you a little bit, is you said it's a little bit more modern, a little bit more updated, but you said 6 out of 10 in terms of a penetration rate. Do you think that's a little bit low? Do you think 6 out of 10 people are going to buy a bed? Do you think 6 out of 10 people in that country have some type of mattress to sleep on? Do you think that's a low number or no?
I think there's an appropriate considering also there's a local part of it. So people that don't have beds, people that don't sleep on beds, people that are homeless. Yeah, I'd leave it at 6, honestly.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
that's okay. Perfect. So you're saying about 60% of the population,
Have
or that's
beds.
about a penetration rate that you would have there. I want to
Yeah.
hear if somebody else has a differing opinion or another way of thinking about it. So I'm gonna ask Johnny, or maybe Devasas. You raise your hand, brother.
Yeah, I was just like trying to clarify of like because we're looking at the market size per year.
Yep.
And for an assumption that was just made, that would mean like every 6 out of 10 people are buying per year.
Correct.
So I was thinking like instead of using like a ratio like 6 out of 10, like can we use like percentages?
Yep.
Like say like for
Usually,
example
yeah,
like
or
5% of like the total population is like repurchasing every year.
you're bringing up a good point, but what you're kind of saying is a replacement rate, which we calculate for in our equation here, right? But what we're trying to calculate right now is the number of beds actually in use. And to get to that number of beds actually in use, we need to build out some type of miniature framework to get to that number, right? And the way that we're doing that is figuring out the beds per person and then timesing that by the number of people who actually use beds. And then to figure out that number, what we're trying to do is the population times how many people actually even have a mattress or have bought a mattress. When you think of penetration rate is how many people have bought this and how many people will even buy this, right? And then that's going to give us a number of people that are actually using that product. Now you could apply some type of replacement rate, or maybe in this case, we apply some beds per person. But usually what you want to do is some type of replacement rate to figure that per year basis, because you're right. Not many people buy mattresses per year, but some people do, and you could throw in some type of ratio there. So what I was saying earlier is I'd probably buy one every 4 years. So you could think about 1 in 4, but most people probably buy like one in every 10 years, right? So that's 1 in 10 or 10%, whatever you want to think about. Does that answer
For
that?
sure. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Johnny, I want to hear how you're thinking about it, brother. So how would you assign the penetration rate?
Well, for the penetration rate, when I think about like the overall market, you don't really see a person buy a bed really often. So when I look at penetration rate, I think of it like a really low number, like almost like single digit. So I personally gave it a 5% just because when you do multiply it by the 200 million population, you do get 10 million people who currently uses the beds.
Okay.
And then from there, assuming that we gave beds per person 6 out of 10, it'll give us 7 million numbers of beds in use right now. But for the replacement rate plus growth rate, I haven't got too far from there yet.
Yeah, that's fair. Which I think honestly, what you did is you utilize some type of growth rate off the get-go. So that 5%, you're talking about how many people are actually replacing their beds or on a per year basis getting new beds. That's what a replacement rate is. But what I want to talk about with penetration rate and kind of make it clear is penetration rate is how many people have ever bought this or will inevitably buy this, right? So in this case, you guys are, choosing your own assumptions. I had a high, or we already had the population. I had a high penetration rate, 95%. You brought up a good point, Devasis, that some people are homeless, might not have beds. So that's why I took off -5%. When I think of penetration rate, I'm thinking of how big the market is in total. When I think of penetration rate, I think of how many people are either have a bed, have owned a bed, or are going to buy a bed in the future, right? And I could assume that most people are going to have a bed. And maybe you could change this around to be 90%, 80%, but this has to be a high number. It can't be 5%. 5% is a replacement rate. How many people are actually buying new beds per year, or how many people are actually replacing their bed this year? So I just want to make that a little bit clear, because I see, it's a little bit a topic of confusion. Completely fine. I just want to clear it up. So in this case, high penetration rate, and in the bubblegum case, high penetration rate, because I assume that most people have gum, most people eat gum. The people that don't eat gum are probably like babies and some old people. So I just said 80% of people have either bought in gum, eating gum, or gonna buy gum in the near future or in the future. Let me go back to the slide that we were at. Choose assumptions, present. Okay. So I've chosen my two assumptions, right? So now I have potentially the number of beds in use. But what I want to figure out is the beds per person. So maybe Madhav, can you come off mute and just give me some rationale on how many beds per person somebody might have?
I mean, depends on what's the average household size.
I'm asking on a per person basis. So beds per person.
Oh, that's per head. I would count two. I would count two per adult.
Okay. So like if I asked you, you have 2 beds.
I mean, the reason why I say two is because you have to take into account that they might buy beds for the kids. So, I mean, I would look at a ratio about the ratio between the adult population and the population that's not an adult.
Yep.
So that would be able to give you an idea to how many beds per person.
That is a good point. However, when you're thinking about, okay, we buy beds for our kids, right? That's not on a per person basis. We've already calculated that with our total population. The total population includes our kids, includes everyone. And then we said that about 95% of the population has a bed, right? So now we have the number of people who actually use bed. What I'm asking here is how many beds per person? And a way to think about this is, okay, well, off a question is, okay, how many beds do I have? Well, I have 1 bed, but if you think about it, in my household, and you brought up a good point there, my sister has a bed, my parents have a bed, right? But that's 2 people sharing 1 bed. So that's, 0.5 bed per person, if you think about it that way. And in one household, we have 3 beds for 4 people, right? And other households is going to be a little bit different. But here, in the framework, it's asking beds per person. So that's kind of what I'm trying to talk about there. And that's why I try to clarify per person off the get-go, Madhav. But thank you for coming off mute, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So 0.75 is what we assign to it. Just because, like I said, most people are married. But me and my sister have our own bed, so that's a little bit more than 0.5, but less than 1. So 0.75 I feel like is appropriate. Okay. So in terms of a replacement rate, let's see, Carol, do you want to come off mute and talk about your replacement rate or maybe some rationale behind your replacement rate?
So just to be clear, replacement rate is like how often you change your bed? How often
Correct.
you
Great.
okay. Um, I'm not sure. I feel like I don't change my bed often. Like
Okay.
I've had the same bed for like 3 years.
Okay.
So
How about other people? Do you think other people change their bed often? How about like try to think about everyone? Like you're not the only person.
um
Think about everyone.
I I don't think people change that bed that often.
Yep.
So once in like once every 5 years, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. And if once in every 5 years, and then that would turn into like what percentage?
20%.
Perfect. So now you have a replacement rate of 20% or 1 in 5, right? So now we've assigned some type of number there. I put 0.25, so 1 in every 4. But that, I think you walked through that, and that was a clear assumption. Ava, what'd you get for price per bet?
Honestly, I was kind of torn about how to go about this because, especially with like, first of all, the range is massive between like a king size bed can range to like from like 600 to 7,000, 8,000. I feel like
Yeah,
they
fair.
can get really expensive, and especially because uh, I would say maybe like just have like a nice number to work with. I said 500 per unit,
Okay.
even though like I don't think it's the best assumption because
Yeah.
baby beds are very expensive, and I feel like that's like across the board any market their baby stuff are quite expensive. But at the same time, I didn't take into account that much just because I don't believe that in the cultural and just with their lifestyle that a lot of people are actually buying separate day bibs, or maybe their babies are just sleeping on their bed. So I
Yeah.
would say like middle ground 500 per unit.
Okay. Yeah, no, you have it way higher than I do, to be honest, but I think you have more rationale than I had. I literally just put a number behind it. I put 150 just because I saw that's how much a twin size bed costs. But you have a lot more rationale. You considered maybe different sizings of bed, different tierings or different pricings between even, different sizes of bed or even within the same size of bed. So I think that's a really good point. I think for this case I put 150. But 500 could be a number. The good thing about these cases is that you could kind of choose what your numbers want to be, but you just kind of have to be aware of what's going to really change the market size. So if the interviewer, like after you come up with your market size, is like, okay, well, the actual market size was 15 billion and you got 10 billion, where do you think this might have happened? Well, you know that, okay, well, maybe I just miscalculated price per bed. And I think in that assumption, that would maybe, if we change that, now we could see if the market size is a little bit closer. So thank you. Thank you for that. So I put 150. And then from there, I show this to my interviewer. I ask him if this looks good. And then from there, now we calculate. So 200 million times 95%. I know 95% of 100 million is 95 million. I used 152 considering the location. Yeah, there you go. 150, there you go. For the 200 million times 95%, I know that 95% of 100 million is 95 million. And then if you times that by 2, that's 180 million. Yeah, 190 million. Yeah, 190 million. So there you go. 190 million. Then if you times 190 million times 0.75, so just for easier math, I'm going to do here, I'm just going to grab 200 million. Actually, I can't even grab 200 million because that's the total population. But maybe what you can do is 200 million minus 5%, or yeah, minus 5%, and then times that by 0.75. But it's got to be somewhere close to 190. It can't be less than what, 85. So I'm assuming somewhere around 142 million. Right? That's somewhere where I'm about. Dude, I have the answers. I'm not that good at math. I'm just kidding. I'm not that good at math, guys. I have the answers right here. Okay. Then I times that by some type of replacement rate. So 25%. But the idea here is you could use easier numbers. So I'm looking at 142 million. I know that 140 million is pretty close. So maybe I would ask my interviewer if I could just use 140 million for simplicity. I did that during my case interview. They did it. They allowed it. Some of them might be hard asses, so just be aware and be prepared for that. That gives you 36 million. 36 times 150 gives you a total market size of 5.4 billion dollars in Brazil. So after we showed our interviewer, now we applied the actual calculations. Usually when you're applying these calculations, you want to talk through them just so that they know what you're doing and they know where you're at. They want to explicitly state the algebra, like I said earlier, right? Okay, awesome. So now we're going to check the answer. So who hasn't come off? Miguel, how would you check if this is even the right not size? Like, how can you figure out if this is even in the right ballpark figure? Like, we got a market size of 6 billion, about $6 billion for mattresses in Brazil. How would you maybe compare this or figure out if this is like the right number? Miguel might not be on there, so we'll pass it to Matthew or Jade, whoever wants to come off mute first. Oh, my bad. I had to change some settings real quick. Okay, Miguel's changing some settings. So whoever comes off mute, I got Matthew, Jade, or Miguel. One of you, whoever comes off mute first.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Jade. Thank you.
Okay, for the market size, well, I actually, well, everybody was talking, kind of started doing a little bit of research, but, like with my assumption of like that it is Latin America and there is still a high poverty rate in Brazil. I would just see how like I would just do some quick research online.
Okay.
But in a case, if we're doing a case, I would just use like my background knowledge, like, oh, this they do come from a Latin culture, and like most Latinos like share beds and stuff like that. And don't really change it. So I would say uh, I don't know. I'm a little stumped, but I would say that maybe like per house, like say per household, I would probably bring up a number that like, oh, maybe there's three mattresses per household, like certainly or not, there would probably be about three.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And then maybe what you could do is you could grab that three, right? You know that there's about three mattresses per household, and you know there's about four people in every household, right? You know the US population. If you want to do some quick math and just do three people per household, so you could say there's about 150 million households, and then you said there's about three beds per house. So 150 million times three beds, that gives us 450 million beds, right? And then we times that by the price. We'll do $100 here. That gives us about $40 billion. And if we take, somewhere around 10% of that, that gives us the market size in Brazil. I think that's fair. Here, what I did is if you do 600 billion divided by 200 billion, so that's the total population, that gives us about $30. And I think that's pretty reasonable per year. If you think about if you replace one every 4 years, right? And you do 30 times four, that gives you 120. So that means people are spending about 120 every 4 years to either buy a mattress or not buy a mattress, but just mostly like in this quick calculation, I think 30 sounds about reasonable. And another thing I could compare it to is, their minimum wage. So in terms of $30 per mattress per year, that's about probably, 1%, if even that, of their actual salary. So that's a way of thinking about it. Let's see what we put here. This is kind of a hard one to do, but it's more or less like a check. If you do this in an interview, it'll make you stand out because you're trying. And I think what Jay did there at the end is, I'd probably try to do some research on my end. I think that's a really good way to also, like, if you don't know a way to check the answer, just say what your next steps would be or what you would do. And then also maybe bring up what might be wrong, where might the model be wrong in terms of things that might be affecting the actual market size. So she brought up prices per bed. She also talked about how many beds per person. So that could have been something that really affected the model. So good points that you brought up there. Is there any questions?
I'm done here. Okay, perfect. Well, awesome. So this week we're supposed to have a consulting firm come in, Proc-DNA. If not, we're here on Tuesday next week with the profitability case. After that, and so next Tuesday, I'll cut this out, man. I'll cut this out. After that, what I would do is, so next week we have the profitability case. The week after that, it's going to be our first firm coming in for CDP only. It's going to be Plant Moran. Plant Moran is basically going to be bringing in different consultants from different practices. So I think it's going to be tech consulting, business consulting, and then like business transformations, if I'm not mistaken. But I'll get that out to you guys in a couple seconds. You guys are going to get the opportunity to hop into breakout rooms with them. So next week, I'm going to give you guys a list of questions that you guys can have ready for them. But this is an opportunity to get some questions out the way, get some mentorship, and really figure out what the hell consulting is by talking to real consultants. And you guys have some good background now. You guys have done some cases. You guys learned about the idea of frameworks. You guys are more set than more students at UIC and probably other schools too. So I want you guys to take advantage of this opportunity. It's going to be virtual. Plant Moran will be here. I will start hitting them up this week. But I just met with them a week ago. So they should be here. They should be bringing in 3 to 4 consultants and hopefully UIC alumni too. So another way to network, another way to learn more about consulting. So that's it on my side. If you're not part of our group meet, please join this. Please scan this. If you watch the record out, you know why, but I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for staying the extra, 20 minutes. And you guys have a great night. Okay.